Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our May program. Welcome to ATW. It's just so nice to see you. I can see your names on our screen. It is so different, such a different time since the last time we spoke. Last time we got together, our last official program was in March when Linda Self gave a great presentation. It was in our old format of Bravo Tech in an actual physical building, and it just seems so much has happened since then. And I hope that everyone has been safe, has been well, and taking care of each other during this very unprecedented time of crisis. I'm just delighted, though, to welcome everyone to our program. Welcome to our guests, to our members. I hope there's new members out there joining. To our members who may be coming back, welcome, welcome. And a special welcome to Paula Sabine, our speaker, who'll be talking about business continuity under the new norm. And I'm so delighted to have Paula, because this is the question that we talk about with our customers a lot of times is, as you bring your employees back and as you start to look at this reopening, and every state is different, and refreshing your strategy, because certainly your strategy that you put in place in January isn't going to work now. So what does all this mean, and how do you manage these multiple phases of coming out of the fog, if you will, or establishing these new norms? So just so delighted to have Paula bring her expertise to this subject. So I wanted to also highlight a little bit about April. As you know, that InnoTech, our normal scheduled program, as they say on CBS, didn't happen. InnoTech is scheduled for August. We had all panelists, speakers lined up, and another wonderful Women in Tech Summit plan. And then all kinds of things happened. But I want to recognize leadership through crisis. And this is the ATW leadership team, because this team rallied together and brought ideas, fresh new ideas, to say, hey, what can we do to keep our community active, to keep our community together, and to make sure that men and women in our community can connect. And I just want to recognize the team who put on all these online programs that I'm going to reference in a minute. But I want to recognize Christy Bonner, and happy birthday, by the way, Christy, woohoo, happy birthday. And Paula Phillips, Aries Webb Williams, Linda Mullins, Susan Slauson, Shanti Rajaram, Eva Musial, and Kala Patel. All of you donated so many hours in a crisis time when you had so many other things going and whatever new norm was happening to you. And so this has been a time when ATW's mission of really supporting women, coming together and supporting women, has really, really shown through. And it's our foundational layer of our organization. So we remain anchored in our mission during this very unprecedented global crisis that is both deeply personal and profound in many ways, because we've been experiencing this we each experience this in different ways. So I would like to also recognize Kala, who put on our first affinity group, Women Who Leap. There were 3 sessions, and all of this is on the website, by the way, the recordings and the programs. Art of Hello by Paula Calise, LinkedIn by Lucinda Rouge, and Intentional Networking by Jennifer Carter. I hope you guys get a chance to take a look at all that. For members, our wonderful affinity group starting up. And then we did this Connect Friday. It's a casual online, it's on Friday, half an hour, come together, have a cup of tea, have some lunch, and listen to experts, people that are living the same kind of crisis and how they're managing. And we heard Valerie Freeman, Trudy Van Horn, heard from Terry Sullivan twice, and he's such an expert on LinkedIn and making your LinkedIn, making sure you incorporate your brand into your LinkedIn. And Michael Quinby from Salesforce, and Ashley Guerra from Software One. A thank you to all of them for their time, but just sharing their personal moments of what it's like and what it's been going on for them during this crisis. So very much thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, thanks to our sponsors. This page continues to grow. We have been reaching out to our sponsors continually, just ensuring them that we're there. We're a very healthy, vibrant organization, and we have kind of pivoted, just as many organizations have. We've pivoted to doing our connecting and our community work online. So there's a lot of rich content out there now, and there's a lot of rich content coming. So be sure you take a look at all the announcements. There's new things we've been adding to various pages. Great Minds has some great ads on their additions to their page. Volunteers, we're always looking for volunteers. ATW is leading the forefront in this crisis as a strong community, and we encourage all of you to stay connected with ATW. Keep in line of sight our website, and be sure to reach out and say hello to each other. And tonight we're having our first virtual happy hour. I don't know why we haven't done this earlier. This is just a fabulous idea. So in all the information that you've been receiving, announcements, etc., there's 3 happy hour rooms, if you will, each with a topic that you can see there on the screen, going through transition during COVID-19, leading remote teams, the new normal, and remote working and homeschooling. And this is a casual, bring your beverage of choice, and it's a casual conversation, sharing of ideas, and just to kind of chill out for a Thursday afternoon, a Thursday evening. So we look forward to seeing you at our happy hour. And with that, I will turn this over to Aries, who'll introduce Paula, and welcome again, Paula.
Hello, how are you? It's so crazy. I wish I could like talk to people, but we are here in this virtual world. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our speakers so we can get right to the good stuff. Make sure you join us, like Marilyn said, for our happy hour afterwards. All right, so Paula Sabine, first of all, she's touted as a great speaker all over. I met someone at a random cloud summit that I went to for work, and he's like, do you know this lady? You know, have you heard her speak? And I'm like, well, let me learn more, and found out that a lot of our ATW board members have heard her speak. So I'm like, well, this is perfect. So Paula Sabine, she's been in IT for 25 years, having held multiple CIO, CTO, CSO, global privacy officer positions in large multi-billion-dollar organizations. She's worked in government writ large and in the private and nonprofit profit sectors, such as industrial manufacturing, education, health, finance, software development, and transportation. She also holds 2 master's degrees, literature and psychology, both of which have complemented her technical background, leading to a holistic path to success. Within the digital transformation journey, Paula has advanced in parallel cybersecurity, privacy, compliance, and overall risk management efforts, receiving multiple awards, including a special government commendation for her cybersecurity efforts. She teaches the evening master's program in information security at Dallas Baptist University, focusing on an ecosystem holistic approach that blends cyber, privacy, pre-audit, governance, and compliance, yielding sustainability and a stronger risk management culture. Paula is the founder and chair of a nonprofit organization dedicated to data privacy efforts, privacymind.org, as well as the founder and chair of the Center of Excellence in Digital Ethics for Smart City Initiatives. Paula also runs her company, Quartus Factor, with a focus on overall strategy and end-to-end risk management, and is the president of Innovation-TVA, an organization dedicated to prepare companies for acquisition. Join me, everyone, in welcoming our speaker for our May monthly meeting, Paula Sabine.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here. Let me know if you can see my screen.
We can see you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here this evening. And I know we can't be physically together, but this is going to have to be just as good. And thank you for the kind words. That's a bit of pressure, making sure that I make this somewhat entertaining this evening. And the topic is not entertaining, so we'll make the best of it. Business continuity planning radically changed a few months ago, 2.5, 3 months ago. And what I wanted to share tonight was some of the discussions that I believe a lot of folks in the C-suite are having, and that allows everybody else that is working for a chief, either marketing or digital or science officer or CIO, CTO, just to understand what those obstacles are being, how they're being addressed, and just form a picture of what is potentially coming next. What I did is I grabbed some of my professional experience, but frankly, hardly anybody's trained for a pandemic. A lot of folks are trained for crisis, for risk, for even very large crisis, but they tend to have a different flavor. Pandemic is a different thing altogether, and not many organizations will train for it. So this kind of has hit us all at once at the same time, and we're all struggling together. I also took some information from McKinsey, from Gartner, EY, and Forrester, and I'll walk you through the picture at a macro level. Some scenarios we'll discuss, approaches, and micro. And feel free to interrupt me here at any time if that is Aries or Marilyn or whoever. Let me know if I'm getting off track. So at a macro level, I just wanted to show a map here of what we had at the time, March 25th or so. So this was about a month and a half behind. But it's a good indication of how we were looking at what was happening in supply chain and in tech and in economics and across the globe based on the total cases we were finding of individuals affected, and then of course the reported deaths. And this map has changed by now, but all of a sudden every company was beginning to track this and making it part of their daily activities, which is a phenomenon, not to take away from the tragedy and the important emotional component we have to apply to that. From a business perspective, now we're tracking things that we did not necessarily have to track before so closely. Also, at an executive level or at a managerial level, folks were beginning to track the market capitalization and how it was declining across sectors and what to expect. Also, this is something that maybe would have been looked at quarterly, perhaps, and now it was beginning to be looked at more on a daily basis. Let me just make sure that I'm still looking. Okay, there we go. Supply chains that have been getting hit, disrupted around the world. And again, I'm staying at the macro level and giving you context for the section that we'll get to, which is about scenarios. But plans that needed to get restarted, and at which point, containers that were stalled, and the container issue was tremendous for the first month or so, and then it began to stabilize. But we know that the container issue will again take place in the southern hemisphere of the world as the winter comes and as the virus hits that area a bit more. So now we need to prepare. If we are a global organization or we depend on a global organization, we just need to make some mental preparation for how that container, that shipment industry is going to get affected. Likewise, for air traffic, it is a little bit unknown what's going to happen in terms of getting back to a somewhat normal flow of traffic. Airplane companies are just discussing right now. They don't really have a refined map. And trucks, mobility as a whole, and which parts of the sectors that have not been hit as much. So based on the supply, the logistics, and the customer demand, this is just a simple map that takes us through the areas that have been hit the most. So what if we are, for instance, in a services company? Maybe we don't rely on containers, we don't rely so much on manufacturing, but our customers might. And that chain effect is something that we need to prepare down the third, fourth, and fifth lane to make sure that we're aware how it gets us, how it hits our organizations or our customers. So let's get to some scenarios here. This is probably one of the most important slides of this whole presentation. And this slide actually is an effort by McKinsey to say, okay, let's look at what could happen. It came out at the very tail end of March, and is still being used throughout April and May. So this scenario building exercise is meant to say, what is actually going to happen by July, by August? Are we going to see a great containment of this virus, or are we going to see a pandemic escalation that would be from B1 to B5? Are we going to see growth rebound, a strong growth rebound that would be a 4, or are we going to see pandemic escalation, prolonged downturn without necessarily a strong economic recovery? And that would be in the area of B3. So on the left-hand side, we have the public health response, and on the horizontal lane, we have the knock-on effects on economic policy responses. Why is this important to us, whether we are in a small, medium, or large organization? It's important because our thinking for the next few months gets framed around one of these scenarios. You may not have sat down, or your company may not have sat down and rolled this out, but what has happened is they intuitively are leaning towards one or two of these scenarios. The recommendation back in late March was at least pick 2 or 3 and be prepared for 2 or 3. By the time we hit beginning of May, a survey had gone out, about 2,000 or so, the larger companies in the US, and they had asked, where do you sit? And interestingly, most of the companies were sitting between the B1, A3, and A1 scenarios. So they were not incredibly optimistic, not on the A4 side, not on the A2 side, but not terribly pessimistic on the B3. So somewhere between B1, A3, A1, around 16, 15, 17% of the folks. The rest were all spread out evenly throughout the remaining categories. So this is important for later conversations. What business leaders should look for in the coming weeks, and this is about the depth of disruption, the length of disruption, and the shape of the recovery. By now, I think that we are beginning to understand more and more the depth in terms of our own organization, our partners, and our customers. Then we move on to the length, which is still uncertain, but we have to take some sort of guess. And that again goes back to this scenario. What do we, I hate to use the word gamble, but what do we gamble on at this point? And the shape of the recovery. What does that look like in terms of effective integration? What does it look like in terms of the bounce back? Do we keep as much cash flow right now as it has been highly recommended since the beginning, since early March? Or do we begin to move that a little bit and begin to change terms and conditions for customers and partners again and get a little bit back to normal? So that shape of recovery is going to be depending on the industry, on the sector, and what your peers are doing and what your customers are demanding from you. Hardest hit sectors that are estimated not to see a restart until 2021, that is not a full restart. Commercial aerospace, air and travel, insurance carriers, oil and gas, automotive, and apparel, fashion, luxury industry. So on the commercial aerospace, probably a full recovery by the end of next year. Beginning of next year for air and travel, insurance carriers will see estimated a little bit of a bounce back by the end of this year, and oil and gas, etc. You can see the numbers displayed. If you are not in this chart, it's still, again, it is about indirectly connecting the dots to see how it affects your organization. If you're maybe you're watching and you're a software developer or you're a business analyst and you have projects in various businesses and you don't know whether to take a job or to apply in a particular industry at the end of the year or to dedicate your time in these industries, this allows you to see roughly where it's headed. And maybe you can begin to think, well, maybe I'm not going to go back to the commercial aerospace until next year because the chances of me getting that project or working in that sector are going to be slim or low. And it gives you an overview of where we're headed. So what approach do we take based on that context? Leaders are being asked to resolve, to have resiliency, to return, to reimagine and reform. Great words, it sounds really good, 5 R's, but what exactly does that mean? A lot of the resolution things that are taking place right now is about speed over research, and that is on the ground at strategy level. Resiliency has become incredibly important, resiliency being now the factor, strength and resiliency that is your competitive advantage over just innovation. We've been talking about innovation for many, many years, but now it is a chance for resiliency to shine. And you'll see indicators of that in organizations that maybe didn't have to furlough or didn't have to let go of individuals. They were just governance-wise and financially-wise, they were just a tad more prepared to weather it. And that resiliency factor may be something that is important for you now as we get into an unknown Q3 and Q4, and you can say, well, maybe I choose or I select these partners based on what happened at the very beginning in March and April and how they reacted to this. They may not be the ones that reacted in the most aggressive manner in helping others, perhaps, those are great stories, and you want to take a look at those companies as well. But the resiliency factor is often it's not promoted, and I think that during these times is one that is going to be truly a competitive advantage. Reimagination. This one is another twist on innovation. So just reimagining just how you do business all together. I was working with a company a few weeks ago that is in manufacturing, small manufacturing, but they have quite a few years of doing this. And all of a sudden, within a matter of a week and a half, they changed their entire production line, their suppliers. They reimagined the business overnight and executed it within a week and a half. And that took a lot of courage. It took a lot of speed and a lot of just ingenuity to be able to say, I'm going to ride this way, I'm going to master this way, as opposed to just be taken by it. And that was wonderful to see this individual, the CEO, be able to do that. And then reform, we're going to be waiting to see what actually comes in terms of regulation. We saw some of the assistance for the small businesses. We saw some of the forgiveness or the delays in terms of having to pay certain things, whether it's from mortgage or for other industries. But what happens next? Is there more policy coming? Is there not? That remains to be seen based on the scenarios we discussed. These are all hard decisions that everybody is making. And I think that overall, when we look at a company that maybe did not react in the manner that we expected, there's so much that we don't know that happens on the back end. And it's just never easy, and nobody's going to react in the best way that we prefer. So on the resolve part, I think that we need to have a lot of compassion for executives that are having to make very hard choices during this time, including those of not being able to keep all their people, which is always a very, very hard last resort choice. But some of them have decided, well, we can't survive otherwise. 6 steps to one end-to-end resiliency plan. Being able to prioritize key risks. This sounds so basic, but actually it's not as easy as it sounds, because everything appears to be a risk right now, and having that long-term view to be able to prioritize things in light of the scenarios that we pointed out is the key. If you're going to run on 2 horses, if you will, or run the track in 2 horses, then maybe you're identifying the key risks based on those 2 scenarios or 1. Develop very tailored scenarios, approaches, practices, conducting some stress testing on the financials if you can, if your organization has the ability or the manpower to do that. Establish portfolio of interventions instead of cash war room dashboard. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then building that resiliency dashboard with cause and effect, and what do those cause, how do the KPIs get affected by the KRIs, get affected by the KGIs? I think all of the KPIs that we had up until March kind of gone out the window, at least for 2020 or 2021, and a new set of KPIs. Maybe the new KPIs are much more closely related to surviving and reimagining ourselves, weathering this, remaining as solid and steady as we can, so that then we can grow in 2021. This is another picture of what executives are looking at right now in terms of what to focus on. So back to the prioritization. Are we focusing on the structural changes that we need to make in the E2E customer credit risk management? Are we focusing on collecting overdues a whole lot more, which is always a very tough thing, especially during this time? Fast and painful exercises that companies make, writing off old stock, factoring receivables, selling old stock, inventory pooling, payment terms renegotiation. almost everybody that I have spoken to has told me, yes, we renegotiated our terms with everyone. And that is a bit of an expected behavior right now, but that can only hold so much and for so long. So what happens after that? We can kind of breathe for a few days or weeks, but then we have to make sure that we are internalizing the possible scenarios of where this is headed, so that then we can get back to as normal as possible. And outsourcing production, more and more, I think that in light of the possibilities that have been observed with remote work and with remote teams, I think that companies that perhaps were not as comfortable before with remote work are beginning to be a bit more comfortable, realizing, well, we can maybe do this. So that means probably that we can outsource some things and we can still deliver at the same level that we had before, especially in light of furloughs or layoffs. Reimagination, could we really emerge in a new normal? Is it possible? More and more, I think you'll hear people say, I don't think it's going to be. It's not going to be exactly the way it was before. So what does that new normal become? I think that we all get to define that together. And again, being very sensitive to the tragedies that are happening around the world, it's also a time in which we can gather and get a little bit excited about the innovation that we can have together in this space of reimagining the new platforms, the new services, the new levels, just a new way of being with customers and with suppliers that can maybe calibrate a relationship even more and make it a better experience. So that remains to be seen. Resetting is always hard. So at a strategic level, that may include changing CapEx, reallocating, mergers and acquisitions, increasing productivity, especially if it becomes much more digitized. But the joke is that you probably have heard lately is that if you were not in the digital transformation exercises and initiatives back by February or so, January, February, then now you plunged right into them in March and April. And differentiation, increasing the gross margin to be about 30% of the industry if that is possible. So it requires a disposition on the part of business owners, of executives, of managers to say, okay, this is uncomfortable, but we'll have to compete now globally. And even as a small company, you're now having to compete in a much bigger pool as companies around the world are becoming also very imaginative in how they sell their services or how they sell their products in light of the digitalization. At the micro level, these are the questions that board members are asking more and more. So maybe something here, if you are having to respond to somebody that responds to the board, or if you respond to a board member directly, then these are some of the basic questions that they want good answers for. So what have been the critical operational processes? And that answer was one way in February. That is a different answer now in May. We have discovered what critical is and what is not after we've had to let go and make adjustments in our operations. What are the exposures? Again, we might have conceived what those exposures were, and we might have thought they were solid back in February. That changed. If we do an analysis today of what those are, then there's a delta there of about 15–20% of what those exposures are. Do the current plans support business objectives? Obviously not, but how do they get quantified and requalified? How soon must the business processes be available to be in a restart position? So these might or might not have crossed your path as questions. And forgive me, there's a typo right there at the top. It's end-to-end civilization. This is a diagram that is meant just to show very simply how to set yourself apart and distinguishing your leadership. And again, this is not just for folks that are in the C-suite or managing at various levels. You could be in a business of one, but you can still lead with your ability to be resilient, to understand others even more now, to understand their pain points, be much more sensitive and be able to deliver exactly where it's needed, to be very reliable. More than ever, that reliability factor is something that we're hungry for, because when the rest of the world appears to be unreliable in several areas, then when you bring reliability to the table, that is gold. That's quite an asset. Focusing on building the future. As the conversations have been progressing over the last couple of months of how bad things might have turned or have turned or what is going to happen, how about just refocusing that and saying, yes, and we have to build a brighter future somehow, so let's roll up our sleeves and get that done and energize those who are having the conversation with you, whether you're leading them or not. Just energize them to the point of saying, yes, let's build together. And it's a great opportunity to kind of flatten an organization, at least from the standpoint of brainstorming, because great ideas will come from anywhere and everywhere. And organizations and companies that take advantage of that will see that every employee or every contractor that is able to get their ideas across and channel them properly will see themselves in that leadership path that takes the company forward. Engaging on 2 tracks based on those scenarios is a recommendation that I would make, maybe being on opposite side of the spectrums. But if your company is engaging on 1 track of what is going to happen in the future in terms of the depth of disruption and the scope and the length, then at least having a very well recalibrated alignment with the board. So traditionally, we have reported to boards, and the boards have provided advice or have provided next steps. I think that this is the time to get much, much closer. And it need not be just the board, but it could be your supervisors, your executives, whoever those are, just having a tighter back to flattening of the conversation that I just mentioned, having a tighter conversation with them so that they can we can be truly aligned both in spirit and in action to develop the new normal together. I'm going to skip a couple of these, just being sensitive of the time, but I want to get to, here we go. So in the past, whenever we spoke about business continuity management, it was a little bit separate from contingency and disaster recovery and separate from crisis management. And I think what the pandemic has done is shown us how much we need an overall strategy that covers all of these areas. And this is the strategy that needs to take place. So you will find in many companies that risk planning and continuity planning is being handled at the third-party risk level, maybe by procurement and contracting with business managers. You have it in IT, then you have it in cyber or in privacy. Then you have it at the environmental level and maybe with the facilities folks. You have it at the records management, et cetera, et cetera. And how often do these parties actually get together and say, we need to converge and we need to learn from each other so much and remain so tightly that we have one overarching strategy of business continuity planning? What does that look like? It looks like when it hits, when the problem really hits, are you scrambling, trying to exchange plans of what you have between the BCM team and the third-party risk team and the facilities team? If you're spending 3-4 weeks scrambling, then that strategy was not in effect. If you're spending a few hours converging or maybe a couple of days max, then that looks like a healthier way of reacting. And why not? We have managed that in companies in communications. We've managed to get marketing to come through, and everybody in the company or in the organization understands what the marketing message is. Why not the risk? Why not the continuity planning and the continuity management? It is largely because it's not as exciting, and the folks that end up in that space normally are not the ones that are always engaged in the most fascinating things of the company, but they're incredibly important. They're the rails of the organization, and what's not on the rail just doesn't get to the finish line. So these rails that have been, the more solid they are, the more vetted they are, and the better strategy on it will deliver faster responses, ability to reimagine, and a quicker effect. During this time, I like this slide because this talks about the nerve center integration team. So what many companies started doing in March and April is they have created either formally a nerve center team, or sometimes it's just a couple of people or one person. And what they do is they have that team very, very closely partnering with the CEO, and or if it happens to be the president, let's say they don't have a CEO, and incredibly closely. It doesn't mean that they hold an executive position, but they are constantly feeding the C-suite leader with what is happening on the ground in terms of the pain, the opportunities, and how they need to react. These messages that have been given to the C-suite leader from this team is hour by hour. It's not days, it's not weeks, especially during March when so many companies were scrambling as to how to react. Those who put this in place were able to very quickly execute, and frankly, in some cases, execute badly, but it's not being looked upon as if, well, that was a mistake, we should not have done that. They just kept on moving. It was about speed and about getting it roughly right. And roughly right was good enough, and the speed was the one that allowed them to remain still visible to the customer, still relevant in the marketplace. It is more and more about remaining relevant. So what I think is going to happen is after these nerve centers have been put together, again, it could just be a person acting as the liaison for everybody else. It doesn't have to be so formally defined. Is that what happens with that role? That role can easily turn into the one that continues to build this business continuity planning. And it really boils down to people that have very good skills at connecting strategic and tactical points, being able to predict and foresee and have enough of the financial and the strategy and the business skill to equip this leader to make better decisions and faster. And it need not be another C-suite member. It could come from the project management side. It could come from the procurement side, wherever it comes from. This is a team that has a lot of influence right now on the C-suite leader. And I'm curious to learn later on, maybe we'll have a chance to chat, is if you have seen a lot of this in action here in the Metroplex, or if this is more that is coming from other parts of the country. In terms of vectors of more traditional business continuity management, is the reliability of the operations and the expected return versus the regulatory stakeholder exposure and risk management. Notice how, for instance, on the top right-hand side, we see that in terms of the expected return for good risk management and good business continuity planning, we want to have brand recognition enhancement, revenue profitability, competitive differentiation, etc. This is under normal times. During this pandemic, we have flipped that into just remaining relevant, remaining resilient, strong, being able to meet our former and future customers where they're at, both in product and services, and expanding, joining arms, partnerships with others. So this has really changed this picture from the traditional to what it has become now, and who knows what it will be in the future. But I think we'll always have traces or a vestige of what happened, what has been happening now, and that will not go away. And I think that's a good thing. It will keep us even more agile. To use a project management term, that agility is going to be key as we build the resiliency. Innovation flows, I think that we will continue to hear dialogues, and Forrester is very big on this right now. Make sure that you're innovative now, as maybe there were many things that you wanted to kickstart and you were not able to do so because of a number of constraints. Then this is the time during this heavy disruption to just kick off some innovation and select the ones that will be more appealing to the new normal, and just run with it. And it is, the researchers are saying, don't worry about getting it as right as you might have wanted to get it 3 months ago. What that means is just staying in front, and not worrying as excessively as we did before about getting it perfectly right. Of course, we'll pay a price for that. So nothing remains without effect. But right now, the calculation is that At least get something done, get out there, reinvent yourself, as opposed to waiting too long. For the smaller companies, 4 actions that build resiliency and reshape results is always putting the people first. And we hear that a lot. And we'll say, well, what does that really mean, putting people first? It has to be defined. We've all worked in companies where that was said, and then we kind of scratch our heads saying, well, this doesn't really match the putting people first. The behavior that I see doesn't match the value claim. So spelling it out for people so that it's completely transparent, and even down to the things that you would like to do and you can't. I think that transparency today is much more appreciated, and the loyalty that you garner as a result of that is tremendous. People appreciate when you say, I can't give you this right now, but my heart is here. I want to be able to give this in 1, 2, or 3 months. I want to be able to process this way, but these are my constraints today. Can you hang in there? Or can you give me your feedback? Can you help brainstorm with us? Communicating with all of the stakeholders and over communicating. We've all felt what it was like to receive a lot of emails or calls from the companies that were very, very active. How are you doing? Are you weathering this well, etc. Maybe it got excessive in some cases, but from the ones that we did not hear at all, it made us feel like, what happened? I wonder if they're still in business, or what became of them. So that communication is important, especially with the suppliers. The suppliers are just as nervous as the companies that are buying from them. And the suppliers actually are, if you are in that space right now, I really believe that you are a great influencer. So you can bring to the table a measure of that stability, that reliability, that forethought that they might be hungry for. And by virtue of you bringing a measure of that, and if you partner with others that maybe you might have not partnered before, perhaps some competitors, then you can come as a platform, as a whole bench, to provide that solid measure of stability that many companies are looking towards. Reshaping the strategy, number 3, to maintain business continuity. We mentioned that quite a bit. And finally, building that resiliency and spelling out what that looks like. What does resiliency look like for my organization? It's a great word, but if you asked it from several executives in the same company, they will come out with very different interpretations. Not just because they're coming from their own business units, but because they have a different taste for what resiliency means based on their life experiences. So constantly defining that, reassessing that, and making it one of the top things that you're aiming for in terms of the vision. So you're aiming for innovation, success, etc., but you're aiming for great strength and resiliency, and that should be the cornerstone of the practice as well. And this is a lot of words that I don't expect you to read, but the slides will be available. So this is the beginning of like a mini handbook, if you will. So when you take these slides with you, you can start from this point onwards, which I think is slide 37, 32, and then be able to have this handy and utilize it in your work. So what does rapidly recovering revenue look like for just about any organization? Having a startup mindset, keeping the human at the core, acceleration of digital tech and analytics. It's not cliche, it's actually vital right now. A purpose-driven customer playbook. Now customers are valuing different things from what they were valuing 3 months ago. An ecosystems and adaptability approach, and being able to identify and prioritize revenue opportunities based on the various months and quarters, so not just by year. Having lots of creativity, even in the flexible payment terms, digitizing sales channels, etc. Acting with urgency. Now, we can only keep up this so much. We can only run, and stay fast, acting with urgency for a few months before we all feel super exhausted. But while we have this runway to try to stay afloat and try to reimagine ourselves, we must take advantage of that. And developing an agile operating model across the organization, if that wasn't in place already, and actually really finding that agility. So what are you willing in terms of risk? What are you willing to let go and drop and help people measure that? And what are you willing to prioritize and make sure that those pieces are agile? Number two, rebuilding operations. So making sure that you are adapting, you have that visibility, agility, productivity, and end-to-end customer connectivity. And now leaders are asking themselves, how can we sustain this performance and for how long? Regionalizing your supply chains. This is a huge one. The companies that were depending on various other parts of the world to supply either goods or services, and many of those countries closed their borders for a while and are still closed in some cases. Then now we're looking for other suppliers and by region, closer region. Making sure that we have, sorry, I lost my thought there. Full suite of technology-enabled methodologies and accelerating cost transparency, compressing months of efforts into weeks. So if we didn't have that full suite of tech-based methodologies, now is the time to make that leap. And whether it is through partners or just if the company can't afford that, maybe it is a time to partner in a creative manner to be able to get to those methods, and having a greater responsiveness from the end customers and understanding from week to week what are they valuing and what the new behaviors are. And for those who are getting a good handle on what the new behaviors are, they are fueling their agility and they're fueling their production lines and service lines accordingly and remaining on the front. Rethinking the organization, specifically who we are today. And if we were selling, let's say we were selling luxury goods, well, that's going to be very painful. Maybe we need to reinvent who we are entirely and how we want to grow until such point where we can sell luxury goods again. We need to be sensitive also to what's happening in so many parts of the country and the world. So maybe there's a level of sensitivity in the service or the product that we have that strikes just touches people the wrong way. It hits a wrong nerve because maybe they're suffering in one corner and we're providing something that's so irrelevant that it just doesn't make sense anymore. What do we do then? Do we fall apart? No, we just figure out a way of staying in front in a different manner. Accelerating the adoption of digital for the reimagination. And then what I also have as the second part of this little playbook is basically industry by industry. What should we be looking at? What are the action items for a particular industry? So if you're in advanced manufacturing and mobility, then making sure that you keep assessing the impact on the supply chain. That's a huge one. That you synchronize supply, manufacturing, logistics, and fulfillment, and reposition the inventory. That you increase the focus on your supplier risk programs. So that's top of mind if you happen to be in this sector. If you are in the consumer, and just the changes, reshaping the consumer behaviors are so huge that you need to build efficiencies and best practices that will benefit operations in the long term. Plan for the fundamental changes in employee and consumer behaviors that might result from the outbreak, even if you're just a project manager or an analytics specialist in this area. You need to understand how those trends are changing so that you can provide good feedback, whether it's in the requirement sessions or in the strategy sessions or in the outcome sessions. And learning and redefining the business continuity processes to ensure the resiliency for future shocks. Energy and resources, exploring available fiscal stimulus, following government advice and best practices on a daily basis as this is changing, maintaining critical assets and services that need to have access to personal protective equipment. You get the picture. Financial services, communication of health and safety priorities to personnel, discussion of alternative customer trust and engagement priorities in the event of disruptive channels, and the exposure. What does the loss of productivity and workforce strategy mean? What does non-financial risk exposure mean? Government and public sector, if you're associated with this space in any way, maybe you are a vendor to them, or maybe you are a subcontractor. This is a space that has gotten hit a lot, and there's going to be a whole lot more on the predictive analytics for citizens, on the available data sources, the publicly available data sources for triaging information, increasing agency collaboration across government entities. So taking advantage of these elements and making sure that you are bringing value in this manner as these recommendations get rolled out. In the real estate, hospitality, and construction area, actions to be taken on a global level, the disruption that drives the change, interruption to capital. I don't want to read this to you because you can just calmly go through it afterwards, but this is an area that is going to need to validate those business plans and incorporate crisis responses, preserving. The most important thing is preserving the value of the assets, developing customer-focused response, and conduct, again here, end-to-end supply chain risk assessments. Health sciences and wellness, this industry, interestingly, you would think that is just receiving, because it's receiving so much attention and there's so much money in some cases flowing through these industries right now, it doesn't mean that it goes to all of them. A lot of the health areas are suffering tremendously, and those are the ones that are exercising their services in areas that are not related or not closely related to the COVID-19. So they're going to have to pick up. It's going to be painful because they had a few months of just not being able to build up their growth as they had before. And private equity, liquidation constraints, taking a look at that in terms of the business continuity plan, where the funds get more active, new acquisitions, and there's going to be a lot of new acquisitions, it's predicted. A lot of small and mid-sized businesses collapsing. They were not able to turn this around, and they're going to have to merge and they're going to have to liquidate. And finally, on the tech area and telecommunications, tremendous boost for those that are more on the native side, and those that were struggling before and could not just remain relevant during this time, then seeing a hit and potentially falling within the acquisition space that we mentioned before. So this was, I know it's a whirlwind, but I just wanted to make sure that I gave you a taste of what is coming, what to take with you as you go through, if you wish to go through the slides before, and if you're working in any of these spaces. When you have a conversation with your peers or in your meetings, you can bring a little bit of this and remain not just relevant, but actually being able to tell the folks that you're working with, this is what I'm learning in the latest research as of May of 2020, and what the E&Ys, the McKinseys, the Gardners, the Forresters are recommending for folks in our space. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Paula. Stay here. Don't leave yet. I'm coming. Look, I'm coming. I'm coming. I had to get my camera back on. Thank you so much. I just love this because it made me comfortable that my, it's kind of selfish because I'm like, my company, we're right on it. We're right on task. I'm so excited. So yeah, we had one, actually Marilyn had a question in here I saw with regards to suppliers. So it said, in terms of suppliers, a lot of supply chains are broken today, especially those supply chains that reach back into China. Like, what impacts have you seen on how companies are dealing with broken supply chains?
Yeah, they're finding as many local alternatives as they can, by local meaning US. That's where the regionalization comment came in. You have almost all of Central Asia, not that a lot of supplies come from that for us, but closed down. China partially closed down. They actually reopened in late April, but now with different terms and conditions. So now with payments up front, right? Now with certain, they're just demanding things that they were not demanding 2 months ago. And just within the Americas, seeing how Canadian and South, even Mexico, how do we strengthen that? Because we don't need either the shipping or we don't need the air travel, and we can remain on the road. It's hard. So,
yeah, thanks for that. A copy of Paula's slides are attached in you should all see it. I can't see what you see, but I know they've been attached, the PDF. So I'm definitely going to look back at that because it looks like a lot of great information. I know you can't get to all of it in such short time, but we definitely want to thank you, Paula, for sharing with us tonight. Check your email. You will see a bottle of wine showing up at your doorstep in a couple of days. So thank you for that. I wanted to just remind everyone that to join us again next month for our June 11th monthly program. You'll see more information about that in the newsletter and on our website. And also another reminder to look, while I was waiting, I poured my glass to get ready for happy hour. So go pour your glass real quick and then join us for the casual networking in whichever room you decide, or bounce around if you want. You'll see those links as well in the chat or in your email. Marilyn, are you here? I can't see. Hold on. Yes, there you are.
Yeah, I am.
Maybe for some final words.
All right. Well, thanks, Aries. And thanks, Paula. What a great presentation and a great overview. So much has changed within the last 6 to 8 weeks. And you just did a great job from a macro view, from a micro view, and a lot of good conversation starters for our customers. I know I've been talking to some manufacturers, and just even the culture change of having to move their global workforce out of their offices. And they were never virtual. So you have all this cultural change on top of all the challenges of broken supply chains and lack of, collaboration tools and all those kinds of things. So definitely living in the moment. And so thank you so much for all the great information. And I also want to say hello. I see all these wonderful names of our members out on our attendees list. There were 44 of you ladies and gentlemen out attending tonight, and want to reach out a special thank you for all of your time and spending time with ATW tonight. It's nice to see your names, and hope to see you at least virtually in the next couple weeks. And be sure, as Ari said, to join us in June. So be safe, be well, be kind to one another, and have a glass of wine, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Good night.